good afternoon. My name is Bonnie Casamasima, and I'm excited to be with you today to talk about how our spaces impact our well-being. My background is in interior architecture, and my work to date and continued work focuses on environmental psychology. So basically looking at how spaces impact our happiness, our health, our well-being. And this is really a conversation, it'll be a high-level, fast conversation with you, but to share how we're looking at our space in conjunction with the intentional life that we want to create, and how we can help both of them support each other. So we're going to go high-level over some research, and then get into the actual things that you can consider when you're thinking about your space a little more intentionally. So I'm going to start the conversation off by asking a question. When you imagine being in this space all day, how do you feel? Not happy, depressed, fine, okay. A little bit of that, right? Yeah. What about when you imagine being in this space all day? Did you feel differently? Yeah, absolutely. So maybe this isn't a fair comparison because who doesn't want to be in the middle of the woods, right? So what about when you imagine being in this space? Does it feel differently than being in the one on your left? Right? So I showed you this because there is research that says we intuitively felt differently, right? Because we knew, just by looking at being in those spaces, imagining being in those spaces, we felt differently. There are direct psychological and biological connections to how our buildings impact us, our health, and our happiness. And it's all rooted in research, so that's the great news. Is we actually have a roadmap of how to repeat this in other spaces. So this is all rooted in my background as in environmental psychology, which basically is just the study of transactions between people and our environments. I think Winston Churchill said it a little bit better though. He shared, we shape our environments, thereafter they shape us. Right? So I'm going to ask another question. If you're looking at 0 to 100%, how much of our lives do you think we spend indoors, inside spaces? 75? Okay. 90%. Right? So this includes car time, right? It's not just in actual spaces. So I think if you were looking in Atlanta, it would probably be like 97% of our time indoors, right? But really when we're looking at actual buildings, it's about 85% of our lives are in spaces. That typically look like this. Has anybody been in a space like that? Like that? Hopefully not as much time here, but spaces like this. More realistically, spaces like this. And maybe if you're really lucky and you have a great coworker, they'll decorate your workstation for you. Right? So these are the spaces that we spend 85+% of our time in throughout our lives. Right? We knew from the beginning that space impacts how we feel. We know that there's research around it. So let's talk about that really quickly. Research-driven design basically is helping us understand how are we looking at scientific research, how are we looking at scientific evidence, to take spaces that look like this, that unfortunately we all know too well, and make them look like this, right? How are we looking at getting access to daylight in our spaces? Setting up our furniture where we actually have eye contact with each other, right? So what happens when we do that? When we do that, we look at healthcare environments, for example. Significant research shows that when we're intentional about the space that we design, it leads to benefits such as increased healing rates. We heal a lot faster. A foundational study was by Dr. Roger Ulrich, and he actually looked at gallbladder patients, and he looked after all the controls, the qualifiers, looking at the health of the participants, so the patients before they came in, all the way down to what color was the paint on the walls. They looked at groups that had a view outside to actually look at a little bit of nature. And this isn't nature like trees in a forest. This is literally some shrubs in the parking lot. And then the other set was actually looking at a brick wall. So what do you think happened with the participants that had a view out to nature? They healed a lot faster, right? Not only that, they actually requested pain medication much less, so they were a lot happier in the process, right? And all this is really saying, we intuitively know that it feels differently when we're in these different spaces, but we have the research that says why and how and what we need to consider. When we pull this conversation into education environments, we see really similar benefits. It reduces stress, people are a lot healthier, they're happier, and when they do that, there are direct links with improved test scores, improved learning retention, okay? So students who maybe took 10 weeks to understand a concept, it can take 8. We have a lot of information and research around how our offices or environments support that as well. When we have access to daylight, when we have intentional materials in the space that are designed with low chemicals, right? They improve our health, and it actually makes us a lot healthier and happier, and it makes us more productive, right? Because we're not spending all of our time sick because of the environment that's attacking us. One study in particular, again, there's study after study out there, so I'm just highlighting high level for you. One study in particular out of the University of Oregon looked at employees in an office environment on their campus. So the employees at the same workplace, same culture, when they did controls for the different stress levels, the different positions, they looked at 5 different groups, group 1 through 5. Group 1 had the best daylighting views, so they actually maybe had a workstation along the perimeter of the building. They could look out into trees. Group 5 probably had a space that we looked at in the beginning, that conference room, a windowless space, not a lot of ventilation, pretty poor materials in it as well. So what do you think happened? Right? So this is the percentage of days missed due to sickness. The way that our body works is when we're stressed, our body is spending so much of its energy to fight that stress that it doesn't have as much energy to keep us healthy. Right? So when we reduce our stress by intentional design, we can look at letting our body function properly in other ways. When we reduce stress by minimizing the chemicals that we're pulling into space, we can do that as well. So all of this information translates to our living environments too, right? I know we spend time in different environments throughout the day, and today we're really going to be talking about some design considerations, thinking about this when you're looking at your space, when you're looking at how your life is intentional, how can your space support that too? And I think it's really important to note that these conversations, it doesn't mean you have to be in a 100 square foot home. Whatever tiny means to you, this conversation is very transferable. So maybe tiny to you is 1,500 square feet, right? These concepts are scalable. We're going to be looking at the individual settings. So this is something that could apply to a freestanding unit. So maybe it's on a foundation, or maybe it's on wheels. And then we'll look really quickly at a case study that looks at more of a community setting and how all of these interact. So let's start with a freestanding unit. One thing we really want to think about with these smaller spaces, or any space, is really thinking about planning for resiliency, right? So really thinking about how are you going to be using that space? What are you going to be, how long do you want to be using that space? Who is going to be using that space? And if it's thinking about ways that maybe I break a foot a year in, and I'm not able to climb up the stair, so maybe there's an opportunity to climb up the ladder. Maybe there's an opportunity to make a more intentional staircase. And in that staircase, you can have storage too, right? So it's a win-win. Maybe we look at having handrails alongside so it gives us some stability. If maybe older generations or anybody that's breaking their feet, for example, trying to get up there. Or maybe we even think about a design that has that master or that bedroom on the main level, right? So just thinking about how you're going to be using space, how it's personalized to you, and then making sure your design supports that. Obviously, this is a pretty intuitive one for people, but being resourceful. When we're moving smaller, we have a lot less space. So how are we making sure that maybe we've got things that fold and configure? There's some incredible examples in some of the tiny houses out here. Have you all been able to tour them? Yeah, really incredible use of space. So just thinking about the areas that typically would be wasted, so maybe underneath the staircase, and how they can be used differently for you. So how are you living with others, right? Keeping everybody alive? Have you all ever had a friend that was a close talker? Right. What about if I just stood here and gave the presentation the whole time? Would it be awkward? Probably, right? So there's a reason for that. So we need to think about how we are having layers of privacy as well as more public spaces in our environment. Right? Because maybe I'm really outgoing today, but tomorrow I just need some rest. How can I do that if I'm living with others? Right? Very possible, incredible success stories, but be intentional about it. Right? So maybe you have intentional spaces that take a little bit of a jump. If you want to read, well, you can have that and have storage around. Right? So thinking about these. This is based on research again, right? When I stood next to you and it was awkward, it was because I was in your intimate space, right? Dr. Edward T. Hall really codified this conversation around proxemics. So it's saying there are certain distances that feel comfortable with each other when we're interacting in a public space, and then when we're interacting a little bit closer. So think about if these dimensions exist, design around them. So if you have a space that's designed for maybe a little more public, maybe you want it to be a little bit bigger. Or maybe you want to think about a way to get it outside your actual living space. Another thing with that is thinking about how we're creating a sense of control and choice within this space. And this layers into territory, right? Territoriality. Have you all ever been in a coffee shop and there's a table for 4 people, one person sitting at it, they've got their notebook over there, they've got their book bag over there. Are you gonna go sit at that table even though there's a chair for you? No, right? So this is something that's innate with our needs, and how do we design around it to support that? It's not bad, it's how we survived for many, many, many years. It just helps us understand. So think about how maybe we're taking advantage of some of the outdoor space to create some more of that social space when we're having smaller spaces on the inside. Maybe we're doing it in such a way that getting into the environment allows us to have the separations. So maybe this is set up for a group, and this one's set up for one person reading, right? So you're getting that layer. So I have a sense of choice. I can use the space how I want. When we're looking at control, think about ways that you're able to modify the environment, such as curtains. Maybe you're saying, okay, most of the time I want this to be open and airy, but today I just want to be really quiet, even though maybe I'm living with somebody else. I'm going to close it to signal this is what I need right now. So think about ways that you can do that without using a lot of space. Another design imperative is really to think about the acoustics with these smaller spaces. There are standards, there are specifications around it for you. So take this, for example. Incredible design, beautiful. A perforated door, so one that has some openings to the bathroom. Okay? So maybe you have somebody, you have a partner that really likes to sing in the morning while they're brushing their teeth, but you like to sleep in a little bit, right? How do you make sure that each person is supported? Know that there are standards out there that help us understand what we should be thinking about when we're designing for this. Think about how the space, we look at all the studies that talked about our impact of daylight on us, how they impacted test scores, health, reduction of stress. Think about the solar orientation of our space. So where are you actually putting the unit in reference to where it's going to be, like where's the sun going to hit it in the morning, noon, and night? This is something that ties directly in with understanding sustainability with our spaces. I know Cara Sabel is going to be speaking next on that, so I wanted to talk high level. What it allows us to do is really understand not only how it impacts our health, but how we're designing our spaces to support the energy efficiency of those homes, so we're spending less on the utilities. In my former role, I worked with South Base, program manager, and we did actually a really intense study on a tiny house, looking at it through an energy model of simulation. So what that means in human terms is we actually looked, okay, how can we intentionally align it with solar orientation? How can we make sure that we're placing it in such a way that we can make it very efficient? And then we can use things like renewable energy, like solar panels, to help with reducing our energy bills, for example. Southbase is really active in this conversation. I'm happy to be a bridge to the organization, but also look up, they're doing some really incredible work around this. On top of that, so this is a picture of 4 dogs and a sunbeam. Do any of you have pets in here? Have you ever seen your animal do this? Yeah. Have you ever done this as a person? Right? Yeah, I want to do that right now. So we talked a lot about the sustainability needs for solar orientation. We talked a little bit about it rather. Thinking about how we're looking at the design for how we're getting direct sunlight when we want it, and satisfying our psychological needs in the process of sustainability. So one design clue is, so the sun rises on the east and sets in the west. Our bodies, our internal clock, are aligned by our circadian rhythms, which is kind of influenced by the rotation of the sun. So if we're able to design where our bedrooms are on the east side of our home, that's going to be ideal. And then your more public spaces are going to be on the west side of your home. Because what happens is our eyelids are a little bit translucent. So it actually takes about an hour for our bodies to wake up. Have you all ever been groggy the day it turns daylight savings? Yeah, right? It's because our body takes about 2 or so weeks to catch back up with that shift. So one way that we're supporting it, yeah, twice a year I'm groggy about it, right? So one thing that happens is your body actually takes 2 weeks to catch up when there's daylight savings. But when your body's actually trying to wake up, it's about an hour process. So the second that your eyelids sense that there's daylight, because it's rising with the sun, it tells your body, in particular your pineal gland, to stop producing melatonin and start kicking into producing that serotonin at a high level, right? There are papers and papers on it, but high level, those are the takeaways. So think about how our body's rhythms can be supported by how we're creating our spaces. Building on that, making sure that what you're putting in these spaces is something that's reducing the chemicals that are coming in. Look at third-party certifications for a lot of your products. GreenGuard is a great one. Talk with me if you want a longer list. We have a short time together today. But making sure that the products that you're bringing in aren't causing more damage to your health, right? Have you ever been in a space and it has that new building smell? Or that new car smell? Those are actually really bad. Because what it is all the chemicals mixing together. So if we're intentional about the products that we're putting in, the carpet, the paints, that have lower chemicals, low VOC, for example, it can really improve our health in the long run and the short term too. And this ties directly into sustainability as well. Know that there are design guidelines around dimensions and recommendations. So we talked in the beginning about aging in place, or maybe I break a foot and I'm wheelchair bound for a few months. Think about when you're creating your space, how it already has this built into it, okay? So there are dimensions around ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act. And it's looking at, okay, our bodies are shaped a certain way, our environments should be designed around that to make it really easy to understand and use. And think about an opportunity like this, for example. You need about 5 feet in a space to turn a wheelchair completely around. So thinking about if you're designing an open living room area or a bathroom, if you have the ability to have that space already built in, maybe in the short term you put some kind of shelf or something there, but in the long term you can take it out and it still supports you. Think about maybe if you're putting your light switches or your power outlets, maybe put them a little bit lower or kind of in this middle range to help you be able to do it if you're sitting or if you're standing, right? Or if it's a kid or an adult, right? It's not just about if you break your foot or not. It's a lot of information really quickly about some things to consider when we're designing our individual spaces. Let's look for a second about how we can carry that conversation into more of a community setting. So maybe we're getting with some friends and saying, okay, let's create an intentional community around this. How are we doing it in such a way that we're building on how our space is impacting our health and and our well-being. It's a great case study in Bainbridge, Seattle, or right outside of Seattle. It's called Grow. Serenbe has an incredible example of this too, and it's right down the road. I highly encourage you all to check it out if you haven't seen it yet, Serenbe. But today we'll just go high level over Grow. And it's looking at variation, choice of interaction, and then a sense of place and ownership, but more at a macro level. So for example, when we look at the overall floor plan, right, or the site plan rather, we've got individual houses here, multifamily over here, and then a large gathering space there. And then your parking is pulled off. So that's a really big one. Think about how your parking is away from your central space. Within those individual homes, there are three different types of floor plans. One's designed intentionally around maybe an individual or a young family. One is designed around a growing family. And then one is designed around someone that's maybe wanting to stay there and age in place. So for example, on the one that's designed to age in place, the master bedroom is on that first floor on that main level. The one that's designed for a growing family has more rooms than the smaller one. What this also allows us to do is have diversity with generations, diversity of lifestyles, all in one space. In addition to that, there's multifamily. So maybe this is somebody that's just wanting to just start out on their own. They want to be part of this. There are accessible price points and accessible designs, no matter what you're interested in. Similar to when we talked about how we're having those layers of privacy, when I stood really close to you earlier, right? It's a really great example of how they've intentionally thought about how do I want to interact with each other. Serenbe does this incredibly with their public spaces. On the front of their homes, they all have deep front porches. So if you want to be social, you can do that. If you want to be a little more individualized, you can go out the back door, right? So by design, it's set up that way. I don't live there, so I don't know how it is every day, but incredible looking at design patterns. What they did with Grow Community is they had layers of privacy, right? Even if they want to sit on their front porch, maybe I want to sit back a little bit and I could be a little more private. Or maybe I want to sit out here a little bit more and be a little more out with everybody else in the center community spaces. And again, just an aerial view of how that parking is separated from the home, so you're able to create more of an ecosystem with where the houses are and the walking trails. Some of them are a little more public than others, so if you want to be more social, go to the more public trails. If you want to be less social, go to the ones that are kind of secondary. When you're thinking about a community setting, think about how you're giving people the opportunity to interact with each other, to have conversations with each other, to have buy-in for decisions, right? So maybe you have community potlucks, or maybe there are individual garden plots that you can have that people can actually use for creating, if they want to be interactive, they can, and having those layers of socialization. We talked about a lot of stuff at a very high level. I wanted to share with you that all of this, our spaces impact our health, our happiness, our well-being. We need to make sure that we're doing it very sustainably. So Carl, as the next speaker, is going to be talking a lot about that. We need to talk about how we can design our spaces to support our health and our happiness, and know that there's research that gives us the roadmap of how to get there. This is my contact information down below. If you have any questions, please let me know. I have a few business cards too. Happy to answer. Thank you so much for your time today. Were there any quick questions? I know we're bumping up on time. Thank you all so much.